It was supposed to be the quietest day of my life. My father had passed just 3 days earlier, and though grief hung over us like fog, I was determined to give him the calm, dignified farewell he deserved. The procession was simple: an old black hearse, a handful of cars, family in black, and the route to the cemetery we had used for generations. I had gone over every detail with the funeral director twice. The only thing I hadn't accounted for was the neighbor from across the street, Martha Keene, the self-proclaimed block coordinator, who treated every inch of asphalt like her personal kingdom. Martha wasn't evil, exactly. She was a control addict, the kind of person who believed parking alignment reflected moral fiber. For years, she had feuded with delivery drivers, gardeners, and even mail carriers. When my father died, she sent me a condolence card that included a line about how funeral traffic can get quite chaotic. Please be mindful. That should have been my warning. The morning of the funeral, everything was heavy but orderly. The hearse pulled up in front of our house around 9:30. The sky was a pale gray, quiet enough to make every car door sound like a drum. My mother sat inside, clutching the folded flag from Dad's service years ago. My brother, James, directed cars into a neat line behind the hearse. Everything was going smoothly, until Martha appeared, wearing bright floral gardening gloves and holding a rake like a weapon. She walked right into the street and began waving her arms. The hearse driver stopped, confused. Martha shouted, "You can't park there. This is a residential street, not a public event space." I thought she was joking. I really did. But the hearse driver rolled down his window, and she leaned in, lecturing about community order and permits for gatherings. I stepped out of my car, still in my black suit, and tried to reason with her. "Martha, this is my father's funeral." She blinked, then said, "I'm sorry for your loss, but that doesn't mean you get to block driveways." There wasn't a single driveway block. Hers, maybe, if she decided to back out, though she never drove anywhere before 10 a.m. Still, she planted her rake in the middle of the road like a referee calling a foul. People began whispering in their cars. My aunt rolled down her window and hissed, "What's happening?" I could feel the shame rising like heat. Martha kept talking about city ordinances, about how the street was, technically, a throughway. My brother stepped up beside me, muttering, "You want me to move her?" I told him no. The last thing we needed was a fight on the morning we buried our father. But Martha wasn't budging. The funeral director, a soft-spoken man named Harold, tried diplomacy. "Ma'am, we'll only be here a few minutes to load the casket." Martha crossed her arms. "Then you can load it from your driveway like everyone else loads furniture." The silence that followed felt unreal. I could see my mother's face through the tinted car window, her expression crumbling. Something in me hardened right then. "Fine," I said to Harold, "pull forward. We'll do it from the driveway." But as the hearse began to inch forward, Martha stepped directly in front of it. She actually blocked the hearse with her body. The driver hit the brakes. People gasped. I took a step toward her, hands up. "Martha, move." She shook her head. "Not until someone explains why this needs to happen here." I was stunned, not just by the cruelty, but by the sheer self-importance. This wasn't about the street. This was about control. Martha couldn't stand being left out of anything, even a funeral. So she made herself the center of it. My brother started recording with his phone, just in case. Martha noticed and snapped. "You do not have my consent to record," he said, "then get out of the shot." Her face turned red. That's when the first police car appeared. Someone, probably one of the funeral staff, had called them quietly. When the cruiser pulled up, Martha looked momentarily triumphant, like she expected backup. 2 officers got out, 1 male, 1 female. The male officer approached calmly. "Ma'am, can we step over here and talk?" Martha immediately launched into her speech about illegal parking, unregistered gatherings, and public disturbance. The officer just nodded, letting her ramble. Meanwhile, the female officer came over to me. "Sir, is this a funeral procession?" I nodded. She exhaled, visibly irritated. Unbelievable. When the officers conferred, Martha's tone shifted from smug to defensive. I'm a resident here. I have rights. The male officer said something quiet, but I caught the words obstructing a funeral procession. Her jaw dropped. This isn't a funeral. It's just people standing around. At that, my mother opened the car door. She stood, trembling, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's my husband in that hearse." You could have heard a pin drop. Even Martha faltered for a moment. Then she tried to recover, saying something about how she didn't know. But the damage was done. The officer told her plainly, "Ma'am, step aside or we'll escort you." She refused. So they did. In front of 30 mourners, the police took her by the elbow and walked her up the street while she shouted about how she was being harassed for caring about her neighborhood. The whole thing felt surreal, like some cruel comedy playing out during our worst day. As they led her away, the officer apologized to me quietly. "We'll make sure she stays away until you're done." I thanked him, though my voice cracked halfway through. My mother just stared at the spot where Martha had stood, as if trying to understand how someone could do that. Once the road cleared, the funeral resumed. But something in me shifted. Grief had turned to anger, not the loud kind, but the quiet, vengeful sort that waits for the right moment. As we drove toward the cemetery, I caught sight of Martha on her porch, glaring from behind her flower pots, already plotting how to make herself the victim of this. I knew she wouldn't stop there. People like her never did. I had no idea then how far she'd go, or how far I'd have to go to stop her. When we arrived at the cemetery, my brother whispered, "You think she'll leave it alone now?" I looked at the clouds gathering overhead and said, "Not a chance." Because when someone like Martha feels humiliated, they don't back off, they double down. And I could feel in my bones that today wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of a war I hadn't chosen but couldn't ignore. The morning after the funeral should have been quiet. My family needed time to breathe, to process what had just happened, to mourn without interruption. But instead of silence, there was a printed note taped to my front door. It was laminated, written in that unmistakable looping cursive that belonged to Martha. "Notice," it read, "residents must adhere to community parking rules. Funeral processions are not exempt. Please ensure future events are properly authorized." My first reaction was disbelief, followed by a low, bitter laugh that startled even me. She'd turned my father's funeral into a zoning issue. My brother found me staring at the paper and said, "You've got to be kidding me." I tore it down and crumpled it, but I didn't throw it away. I wanted proof of just how far she was willing to go. By noon, half the neighborhood knew. People stopped by with casseroles, kind words, and sympathetic looks that always ended with a whispered, "I can't believe what she did." Apparently, someone's video of Martha being escorted by the police had made it onto the local Facebook group. It had over 200 comments in an hour. The title read, "Crazy Neighbor Blocks Funeral Procession." Most people sided with us, but Martha wasn't the kind to back down under social pressure. She'd been called out online before, over trash cans, over decorative mailboxes, even over kids' sidewalk chalk drawings, and she always came back swinging. Sure enough, by evening she'd posted a statement on Nextdoor. She called the funeral an unauthorized street obstruction and claimed the police misunderstood her intentions. She said she was deeply sympathetic to my loss but couldn't stand idly by while safety violations occurred. My phone buzzed nonstop with screenshots people sent me. My mother saw one and started crying all over again. "Why would anyone do that?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. But I knew this wasn't about the funeral anymore. It was about control, about her needing to prove she wasn't wrong. The next day, I tried to be the adult in the room. I went to her house with the intention of settling things quietly. Her front lawn looked like a botanical battlefield, too many flowers, trimmed into geometric perfection. I rang the bell. She answered, wearing a sun hat and gardening apron, as if she hadn't just made national news in our town's gossip thread. Her smile was brittle. "Oh, it's you," she said. "Come to apologize for the commotion?" I had to take a deep breath before speaking. "No, Martha. I came to ask you to stop posting about my family. What happened was already hard enough." She pursed her lips. "You think you're the victim here, don't you?" I was enforcing community rules. "You can't just close off the street." I gestured around at the perfectly empty road. "It's a public street, Martha. Nobody closed it off. You walked into the middle of it." Her tone sharpened. "I don't appreciate your hostility. I tried to be reasonable," I said. "Blocking a hearse isn't reasonable." For a moment I saw something flicker in her eyes, shame, maybe, but it vanished as fast as it came. "You're harassing me on my property," she said loudly, glancing toward her window like she was hoping someone would be watching. I stepped back immediately. "I just wanted peace," I said. "That's all." She smiled again, thin and false. "Peace comes from following the rules." Then she shut the door in my face. I thought that would be the end of it, but Martha wasn't done. 2 days later, I received a letter from the Neighborhood Beautification Committee, which, to my knowledge, consisted of exactly one person, Martha. The letter cited inappropriate roadside gatherings and potential violations of Local Ordinance 14.2, complete with a warning that further disruptions may result in citation. She'd created official-looking stationery for her fake committee. My brother laughed so hard he nearly choked when he saw it, but my mother didn't find it funny. She called the city to ask if the letter was legitimate. They told her there was no such ordinance. Still, the damage was done. Neighbors started whispering that we might be in some kind of trouble. Then came the pettiness. Every morning for the next week, Martha would sweep the edge of her driveway just as I left for work, timing it so she could glare at me. She began parking her car as close to my mailbox as legally possible, forcing the mail carrier to awkwardly maneuver. She even left little piles of clippings near my fence, like breadcrumbs of irritation. My brother wanted to call the police, but I said no. "Let her bury herself," I told him. I meant it. I knew from experience that people like Martha always overplayed their hand. They couldn't resist showing off their righteousness until it turned into self-destruction. But things escalated again faster than I expected. A week later, I came home from the cemetery. My mother wanted me to bring her flowers to my father's grave, and found 2 uniformed city inspectors in front of my house. They were measuring the width of the street and taking note. One of them waved me over. "You the homeowner?" I nodded. "We received a complaint about illegal parking and obstruction during a private event." I almost laughed. "You mean the funeral?" They looked uncomfortable. "We have to follow up on all reports." Behind them, Martha stood on her porch, arms folded, watching like a general inspecting her troops. I told the inspectors the full story, showed them the police report, and they apologized before leaving. But the humiliation lingered. Martha had officially weaponized the city against us. That night, my brother wanted revenge. He suggested posting the police report online, tagging her by name. I refused. "That's what she wants," I said. "She feeds off chaos." He said, "So what, we just let her keep going?" I didn't answer right away. I was thinking of my father, how he used to say, "The best revenge is letting fools prove themselves." But I also remembered something else. Dad never let anyone push him off his own land. And that's what this felt like, territory. My father's memory had been trampled on, our grief turned into spectacle, and now our home was under siege by pettiness disguised as civic duty. I couldn't just let it slide forever. A few days later, the universe handed me the smallest taste of satisfaction. Someone, probably one of the teenagers down the block, hung a sign on the community bulletin board reading, "Beware, Funeral Karen on patrol." It stayed up for hours before Martha tore it down, but not before someone snapped a photo. It went viral again. This time, even people outside our neighborhood chimed in, calling her the Hearse blocker. Her reputation was spiraling, but instead of apologizing, she doubled down. She started claiming I had harassed her on her property and even hinted that I'd intimidated her with threatening language. I knew it was a lie, but perception was her battlefield, and she was winning in small ways. People began avoiding eye contact, afraid to pick sides. Then came the letter from her lawyer, or rather, her cousin, who worked as a legal consultant. It accused me of defamation for allowing videos of her arrest to circulate. I almost admired the audacity. The letter was written on copy paper, formatted like something from a free template site. My own lawyer, an old friend of my father's, laughed when I showed him. "She's bluffing," he said. "She's not stupid enough to file anything real." But he warned me to document everything. "People like that," he said, "they're not after justice, they're after control. And when they lose control, they get desperate." He was right. The next morning, Martha crossed a line she could never uncross. When I left for work, I found a small wreath, black ribbon, white flowers, hung on my mailbox. A mock memorial. At first, I thought it was some kind of sick prank from the internet attention, but then I saw her on her porch, sipping coffee, pretending not to watch. My chest went cold. This wasn't pettiness anymore. It was psychological warfare. My brother wanted to confront her, but I stopped him. "No," I said, "we're going to do this right." Because in that moment I decided something I hadn't been ready to admit. I was done playing defense. If Martha wanted a war of control, she was about to find out she'd picked the wrong opponent. That night, I started planning. I gathered every letter, every photo, every post she'd made. I printed screenshots, compiled timestamps, even pulled the city inspection notice. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it yet, but I knew I wanted leverage. Real, undeniable leverage. The kind that could end her little reign for good. And as I sat there surrounded by papers, the strangest thing happened. I realized I wasn't angry anymore, not in the same way. I was calm, methodical, detached. Because this wasn't just about my father's funeral anymore. It was about every moment she'd made our neighborhood miserable. And if she thought blocking a hearse was dramatic, she hadn't seen what was coming next. The first time I saw the city council's email with Martha's name in it, I knew my plan was working. I'd submitted a formal complaint to the Community Mediation Board with every shred of documentation I had, photos, letters, timestamps, witness statements from neighbors, even the police report. I didn't expect much. Small-town bureaucracy usually meant endless delays and polite nothingness. But 3 days later, I got a response. "We will be reviewing your materials at next week's community compliance hearing." In other words, Martha was finally going to have to answer for something she couldn't control. I didn't tell my mother or brother yet. I wanted it to be my quiet project, something that could maybe give me closure. But as the date approached, things around the neighborhood grew stranger. Martha could sense something shifting. She had a sixth sense for losing power. Her behavior changed from smug to paranoid. She started walking the street at odd hours, snapping photos of driveways and trash bins, muttering about illegal placements and violations. One morning I found her crouched near my curb with a tape measure. When I asked what she was doing, she said, "Recording proof of your boundary infringement." I looked around. There was nothing there except a patch of grass my father had replanted last summer. "You're losing it," I said quietly. She stood up, eyes wide, and hissed, "You think you can make me look crazy? You'll regret that." I smiled without humor. "You're doing that yourself." She stormed off, slamming her clipboard against her thigh. Meanwhile, the online saga kept fueling itself. Someone had made a meme of her blocking the hearse, complete with the caption, "Thou shalt not pass," without HOA approval. It was cruel, but people shared it everywhere. I knew that kind of public humiliation was gasoline for her ego's fire. She needed to prove she was still the authority, still the moral backbone of the street. So she retaliated in the only way she knew, by overreaching. A few days before the hearing, I came home to find a large orange sticker slapped onto my mailbox. It read, "Pending code review, unauthorized structure." It was fake, of course. I peeled it off immediately and took photos. When I confronted her across the street, she pretended ignorance. "Oh, is that what that was? Maybe the city finally noticed your non-standard mailbox height," I said, funny, because the city told me they don't use orange stickers. She shrugged. "Then maybe someone's trying to send you a message." Her grin was pure malice. I walked away before I said something I couldn't take back. The night before the hearing, I barely slept. I kept replaying every moment from the funeral, every insult, every calculated smirk she'd thrown my way. Part of me wondered if I'd gone too far, if trying to bring her down made me just like her. But then I remembered my father's face the day he'd told me, "Never let someone mistake your kindness for weakness." This wasn't vengeance. It was justice dressed in paperwork. The hearing was held in the local civic center, in a small room that smelled like burnt coffee and old carpet. I arrived early, dressed in the same black suit I'd worn to the funeral. There were 5 people on the board, 3 council members, 1 city attorney, and a moderator who looked perpetually tired. Martha arrived 10 minutes late, wearing a bright blue blazer and carrying a binder the size of a phone book. When she saw me, she gave a small, triumphant smile, like she was walking into a courtroom drama where she'd already rehearsed her victory speech. The moderator opened the session by outlining the complaint: alleged harassment, misuse of municipal reporting systems, and interference with a lawful funeral procession. Martha immediately interrupted. "Those accusations are outrageous. I was enforcing community order." The moderator held up a hand. "You'll have your turn, Mrs. Keene." I presented my evidence calmly, one item at a time. The videos, the fake letters, the orange sticker, even her next-door posts where she admitted to taking initiative when others won't. Each piece landed like a small hammer tap. The board members kept exchanging looks. When it was her turn, Martha flipped open her binder with dramatic flair. She had photos of parked cars, screenshots of my lawn, copies of ordinances printed from who knows where. "This man," she said, pointing at me, "has created a hostile environment by mocking me publicly and encouraging online harassment." I asked, "By existing?" She snapped, "By weaponizing sympathy." The moderator frowned. "Please stick to factual events, Mrs. Keene." She huffed but continued, her voice shaking between anger and desperation. "He's turned the neighborhood against me. I'm afraid to leave my home now." It was a fascinating performance, part victim, part vigilante. But then the city attorney asked a single question that cracked her facade completely. "Mrs. Keene, did you or did you not stand in front of a moving vehicle containing a deceased individual?" For a full 5 seconds, she didn't answer. You could feel the tension humming in the room. Finally, she said, "It wasn't moving." The attorney nodded slowly. "So you confirm you obstructed it?" Her mouth opened, then closed. The silence stretched until even she couldn't fill it. The board concluded the hearing after another 15 minutes. I left without saying a word to her, but when I passed by, I caught a glimpse of her expression. It wasn't anger anymore. It was panic. The ruling came 3 days later. The board officially censured Martha for harassment and misuse of public services. It wasn't a criminal conviction, but it was enough to strip her of any self-appointed authority. The city even issued a warning letter recommending psychological evaluation before she could participate in any future neighborhood committees. It was more than I'd hoped for. My mother cried when I told her. My brother clapped me on the back. "Dad would have been proud," he said. For a few fleeting days peace returned. Then the retaliation began anew. This time, it wasn't loud or obvious, it was insidious. My garbage cans started disappearing, then reappearing down the block. Someone began calling in noise complaints every time we had visitors. Our porch light bulb was mysteriously unscrewed one night. I knew it was her, but without proof, the police couldn't do much. The officer who came out one evening shrugged. "She's a known problem," he said. "But unless she's trespassing or threatening you directly, our hands are tied." I thanked him and closed the door, but inside, my thoughts were far from calm. Martha had lost her public battle, so she was moving to guerrilla tactic. I realized that if I wanted this to end, I had to take away her sense of control completely. I started watching her, not obsessively, but carefully. Every morning she had the same routine. Out by 8 to water her plants, back inside by 9, lunch on her porch at noon, TV light flickering by 7. Predictable, rigid. It was all about control and schedule. And if there's one thing I learned from years of dealing with her, it's that people who crave order fear unpredictability more than punishment. So I made her world unpredictable. It started small, harmless, even. I asked a few neighbors to park randomly in front of her house, never the same car twice, never for long. I convinced the mail carrier to switch his route so she couldn't predict when her mail would arrive. I even paid a kid $20 to ring her doorbell at different hours pretending to deliver flyers. Each time, I watched from my window as she peeked out, scanning the street with growing suspicion. It wasn't malicious, it was balance. Then, fate handed me an unexpected weapon. The funeral video, the one that had gone viral, was picked up by a local news site for a segment on community conflict and grief. They reached out to me for comment. I almost said no. I didn't want more attention. But then they mentioned they'd already asked Martha for her side. I knew what that meant. She'd spin herself as the misunderstood hero. So I agreed, on one condition, that they show the full clip of her blocking the hearse. They did. When the segment aired, it was devastating. The reporter didn't even editorialize. They just showed the footage, then panned to my mother explaining how painful that day had been. Martha's attempts at justification sounded delusional next to the raw reality of a grieving family. Within hours, the story exploded again. This time, it wasn't just local, it hit national feeds. She became the internet's latest villain, the hearse blocker, trending for all the wrong reasons. By the next morning, her porch lights were off, blinds drawn. She didn't come outside. For 3 straight days, her car never moved. People stopped by my house, some to offer sympathy, others to gossip. My mother told me to let it go. "You've done enough," she said. And maybe she was right. But when I looked across the street at that house, the same porch where she'd stood smirking while we buried my father, I felt no guilt. Only relief. Because for the first time since that awful day, Martha Keene wasn't in control anymore. But I should have known better. People like her don't disappear quietly. They retreat, gather strength, and come back sharper. I didn't know it then, but Martha was already plotting her next move. One that would turn the entire neighborhood upside down and make the police come knocking at my door again. The moment the bomb squad arrived, the neighborhood turned into a scene from a thriller movie. Police cars blocked both ends of the street, red and blue lights painting everything in chaos. The officers ordered everyone to stay inside, but no one really did. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open, phones recorded from behind blinds. I stood on my porch, numb, as a uniformed officer approached and said, "Sir, please remain inside until we determine what's in the package." I tried to explain that I hadn't sent anything, that this was clearly a setup, but he only nodded politely and repeated, "We just need to make sure." Across the street, Martha was standing under her porch light, wrapped in a robe like a mourning widow, clutching a mug of tea. The faint smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know. She had planted that box herself. I could see it in her eyes. Satisfaction, anticipation, maybe even excitement that things had escalated to this level. She didn't just want control anymore. She wanted me destroyed. I watched as the bomb squad carefully examined the box. A robotic arm lifted it and placed it on the pavement. They scanned it, x-rayed it, and then one of them called out something I couldn't hear. A few minutes later, they waved the all-clear. It wasn't an explosive. It was a shoebox filled with old nails and scraps of paper, the top lined with cut-out letters that spelled, "Stay quiet." The irony was almost funny, almost. I laughed once, hollowly, when I saw it, but the officer didn't. "This is serious," he said. "Even if it's not dangerous, it's intended to intimidate." I nodded. "Yeah," I said. "That's her specialty." By morning, the whole street knew. Someone leaked the bodycam footage of the bomb scare, and it hit the local news again. Tensions rise in Oakhaven subdivision as feud escalates. Reporters showed up before sunrise. I declined interviews, but Martha didn't. She stood at the edge of her lawn, perfectly made up, giving emotional statements about how she feared for her life and hoped authorities would finally intervene. She played her part flawlessly, shaking voice, tears at the right moments, lines rehearsed like a script. Watching her on the morning news felt surreal. My mother called crying again. "Please, son, let it go. This is getting dangerous." But it was past that point. This wasn't a fight anymore, it was survival. I spent the next 2 days gathering proof. My lawyer and I went through the footage, the handwriting on the box, even the paper scrap. One of the notes inside had the corner of an HOA newsletter still attached. My brother compared it to the ones Martha used to distribute. The cut matched perfectly. That was enough for the police to take it seriously. They opened an investigation into possible falsified reports and obstruction. I thought, finally, maybe this would end with her being exposed once and for all. But the more the police investigated, the more Martha doubled down. She began telling people I had powerful friends in the city working to silence her. She claimed I was manipulating evidence. It was like she'd created a fantasy world where she was the protagonist of a conspiracy, and everyone who challenged her was part of some dark plot. Then something happened that made it all worse. A reporter from a national true crime podcast reached out. She wanted to do a full episode on the funeral Karen story, complete with interviews, police reports, and neighborhood accounts. My lawyer warned me not to talk, but I knew if Martha got to the press first, she'd control the narrative again. So I agreed, but on my terms. I told the producer everything, from the funeral to the fake petition to the box of nails. I gave her copies of police reports, video evidence, even the restraining order filings. I spoke carefully, calmly, like my father would have. Measured words, no anger, just truth. When the episode dropped 2 weeks later, it exploded online. The title alone, "The Woman Who Blocked a Hearse," was enough to make people click. Listeners were furious. Hashtags trended. Even national outlets picked it up. But the best part was how the podcast ended. The reporter played the audio of Martha screaming at police the night of the bomb scare, insisting she knew it was him, while the officer calmly said, "Ma'am, the box has your fingerprints." That single line changed everything. Overnight, she went from victim to liar. Her name became synonymous with delusion. The comments were brutal. Even people who had once defended her turned against her. For 3 days the street was silent. No lights in her windows, no curtains moving, no sign of life. Part of me pitied her. I knew that kind of humiliation could break a person. But pity turned to dread when I came home on the 4th day and found my garage door open. I froze. My brother was supposed to be at work, and my mother never touched the garage. I stepped inside carefully. Nothing looked stolen, but on my workbench there was a single envelope. No stamp, no address, just my name in blocky handwriting. Inside was a photo of me and my mother standing outside the church after the funeral, one I didn't even know existed. On the back was written, "You'll regret making me the villain." My hands shook as I showed it to the police. They took it seriously now. They even sent a patrol car to park nearby for a few nights. But that didn't comfort me. The thought that she had a photo like that meant she'd been watching us even that day. The idea of her standing there, snapping pictures while my family grieved, it made my skin crawl. My brother wanted to install cameras everywhere, and I let him. We put up motion sensors, security lights, door alarms. Still, I couldn't sleep. Every noise outside made me jump. I started dreaming of the funeral again, except in the dream, Martha was always standing at the front, blocking the casket. Then, one evening, the police finally came back with results from the fingerprints on the box. 2 were confirmed to be hers. They'd traced the tape to a brand only sold at a specific craft store where she'd been caught on camera shopping that week. When I got the call, I almost didn't believe it. "So that's it?" I asked the detective. "You're going to arrest her?" He paused. "We're issuing a warrant for filing false reports and evidence tampering. But she's already gone." I frowned. "Gone where?" She checked herself into a private wellness center outside the city. "Said she's taking time away from a toxic environment." I felt the strangest mix of disappointment and relief. After everything, she'd slipped away on her own terms. The following week, the neighborhood was eerily normal. People mowed lawns, waved again, talked about normal things like weather and taxes. My mother started sleeping again. My brother even joked that he missed the chaos. I laughed, but it didn't reach my eyes. Because deep down, I knew Martha wasn't finished. People like her didn't take accountability. They waited. Still, life had to move forward. I focused on work, spent time fixing up my father's old truck, and even started helping my mother sort through his things. For the first time in months, peace didn't feel impossible. That illusion shattered a month later. It was a Sunday morning, sunny and deceptively calm. I was trimming hedges when I heard a loud crash from across the street. I turned and saw a black SUV slamming into Martha's old mailbox post. The driver got out. It was a young couple who'd just moved in. The man looked embarrassed. "Sorry, man, we're replacing it anyway." I froze. "Replacing it?" He laughed. "Yeah, the realtor said the old owner told her to burn that cursed mailbox before she left." He said it like a joke, but I couldn't laugh. That night, when I went to bed, I dreamed again of my father's hearse. But this time, it wasn't Martha standing in front of it. It was me, staring at the road, unable to move. 2 days later, I received one final letter. No return address. Inside was a short handwritten note. "You think this is over. It isn't. You humiliated me. You made me famous for the wrong reasons. I will find a way to make you understand what you took from me." There was no signature, but I didn't need one. The handwriting was burned into my memory. My lawyer took it to the police, who promised to keep an eye out, but I knew better. Martha was somewhere out there, nursing her grievance, waiting for her moment. Still, even with the fear lingering, I couldn't help but feel something close to satisfaction. The world knew who she really was now. Her mask had cracked in front of everyone. I thought of my father again, how he'd always said, "Character reveals itself when the lights are brightest." Martha had built her life around being seen as righteous, moral, powerful. And when the spotlight finally hit her, it burned her alive. That night, as I stood on the porch looking across the empty street, I realized something strange. For the first time since that awful day, I didn't feel angry. I didn't even feel afraid. Just tired. Tired of fighting someone who thrived on misery. Tired of letting her existence dictate mine. I whispered into the quiet, "Rest now, Dad. It's finally done." But even as I said it, I knew that if Martha ever came back, I'd be ready. Because I'd learned something she never had. Control doesn't come from fear. It comes from letting go of it. It had been nearly 3 months since the last letter, and for a while, I let myself believe that chapter of my life was finally closed. The neighborhood had slipped back into its gentle routine, like a pond smoothing over after a stone's been thrown. The new couple across the street had painted Martha's old house pale yellow, planted lavender by the porch, and laughed loudly enough that it made the place feel human again. My mother was smiling more. My brother stopped checking the cameras every night. Even I had started to breathe normally again, though I still flinched at the sound of tires slowing in front of my driveway. But peace, I was learning, never really comes clean. Comes with echoes, and one cold Friday morning, those echoes came back in a way I never saw coming. I was in my office downtown, halfway through a cup of coffee, when my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It was a photo, grainy, clearly taken from a distance. It showed my mother outside her favorite cafe, feeding crumbs to pigeons. The text below it said, "Still living her best life, I see." My hands went cold. The number was blocked when I tried calling it back. I forwarded it to my lawyer immediately, who contacted the police. They traced the message to a prepaid phone purchased in another city, but that didn't help. I knew who it was. Martha had resurfaced. When I told my brother, he swore loudly, pacing like a caged animal. "She's not even supposed to be near us," he said. "She's still under investigation." But the truth was, she hadn't broken any law, not yet. She was just circling again, reminding us she was still out there. That night, I drove past her old house. The new owners had put up a string of fairy lights and a wreath on the door. For a moment, I imagined Martha standing there, watching her former domain be defiled by normal people. Control had been her oxygen, and now she was suffocating without it. That made her dangerous. The next week, my brother spotted a familiar car parked down the street, a dark gray sedan with a dented bumper. He snapped a photo and sent it to me. The license plate matched one registered under Martha's old address. We called it in, but by the time police arrived, it was gone. The officers told us to document and stay vigilant. I could tell even they were tired of this story. I was too. But part of me was no longer scared. I was angry. I was tired of being the hunted. So I decided to end it, once and for all. It started with a phone call to the wellness center she'd supposedly checked herself into months ago. I pretended to be a journalist researching community reconciliation cases. The receptionist hesitated, then confirmed that Martha had checked out after only 2 weeks. "Did she leave a forwarding address?" I asked. "I'm afraid not," the woman said, lowering her voice. "But she requested her mail be redirected to a P.O. box in Ashridge. That was 2 towns over." I thanked her and hung up, heart pounding. Ashridge wasn't far, about an hour's drive. I went there that weekend under the pretense of visiting a friend. The post office was small, tucked between a diner and a used bookstore. I sat in my car across the street for nearly 2 hours, waiting. When I finally saw her, I almost didn't recognize her at first. Martha had lost weight. Her hair was cut short and uneven, her clothes plain and colorless. She wore sunglasses even though it was cloudy. But it was her. She moved with that same rigid self-importance, shoulders back, chin high, as if the world were still her audience. I watched as she collected her mail, looked around cautiously, and then disappeared into a nearby alley toward a parking lot. Her car was the same dented gray sedan. I followed her from a distance, careful not to be obvious. She drove to a small rental cottage on the outskirts of town, run down, isolated, surrounded by pine trees. There were wind chimes on the porch, and a faded sign that read "Peaceful Pines." The irony wasn't lost on me. I sat there for a long time, engine off, thinking about what I was doing. Confronting her again could blow everything up. But letting her keep stalking us would never end. Finally, I stepped out of the car and walked up to her door. When she opened it, the look on her face was priceless. A flicker of shock, then immediate composure, like she'd rehearsed this moment too. "Well," she said, voice calm and cold, "the prodigal neighbor returns." I kept my voice low. "You sent me the picture of my mother." She didn't deny it. "I wanted you to remember how fragile your little world is." "You're sick," I said. She smiled faintly. "No, I'm awake. Everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I see things clearly. You destroyed my reputation. You made me infamous, and the world believes your lies." I stepped closer. "You did that to yourself. You blocked a hearse, Martha. You humiliated yourself." Her eyes hardened. "That's your version. But I know what you did. You turned me into a circus act. I lost everything." For a moment, I saw something behind her anger, grief, maybe, or the ghost of her former self. But it vanished when she said, "Maybe now you'll lose something too." I realized then she wasn't threatening me, she was promising something. I left without another word, but my hands were shaking on the steering wheel all the way home. 2 nights later, the promise took shape. Around 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of glass shattering. My brother was already running down the hall. Someone had thrown a brick through our front window. Attached to it was a note, scrawled in thick marker. "How does it feel?" The police came again, took photos, filed another report, promised to increase patrol presence. But the truth was, everyone knew who did it. There was no need for fingerprints. The anger in those words was unmistakable. It was Martha's handwriting. My lawyer suggested filing for a permanent restraining order, but he also warned, people like her rarely obey them. Sometimes they see it as a challenge. He wasn't wrong. Over the next few weeks, little things kept happening. A dead bouquet left on our porch. A voicemail with static and faint laughter. Scratches on the hood of my brother's car. Each time, the police documented it, and each time, there wasn't enough to act. It became clear that Martha wasn't just trying to scare us, she was trying to break us slowly. Then, one evening, everything stopped. No calls. No notes. Nothing. A week passed, then another. It felt suspiciously peaceful. Until the detective called. "We found her car," he said. My chest tightened. "Where?" "At a rest stop off Highway 19. Abandoned. No sign of her. The engine was cold. There was a note on the dashboard addressed to you." I didn't breathe for a few seconds. "What did it say?" He hesitated. "You should read it yourself. It's being held as evidence, but I'll let you see it." When I read it, the world went quiet. It was handwritten, shaky but familiar. "You win," it said. "You took everything from me. My home, my name, my sanity. I can't live in a world where I'm the villain. Maybe now people will understand what you really are." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Her car had been left near a deep ravine that ran parallel to the highway. They searched for days but found nothing. The official word was, "Missing, presumed dead." I wish I could say I felt relief, but I didn't. I felt hollow. Because even though she had tormented me, a part of me understood her in a twisted way. We'd both been consumed by the same thing, control. I wanted control of peace. She wanted control of power. Neither of us got it. The funeral had started it, but the truth was, we were both burying something long before that. Her dignity, my patience, maybe even my faith in people. Months passed. The story faded from the news, replaced by newer scandals. The neighborhood healed, mostly. Every now and then, someone would mention her name like a ghost story. "Remember that woman who blocked the hearse?" I'd nod but never add anything. My mother still left flowers at my father's grave every Sunday, and one day, I joined her. She looked at me and said softly, "She's gone now. Let her go." I wanted to believe her. But sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits the chimes we hung by the window, I hear a faint, familiar sound, like the rattle of Martha's old porch chimes. I tell myself it's nothing, just wind and memory. But part of me wonders if she's out there somewhere, watching, waiting, rewriting the story one last time. And maybe that's her real victory. Not the chaos she caused, not the humiliation she suffered, but the fact that she'll always live rent-free in the back of my mind. The woman who blocked a hearse and turned a funeral into a war. The woman who taught me that evil doesn't always wear a mask. It sometimes wears gardening gloves and a fake smile. I've kept one thing from that day. The laminated notice she taped to my door after the funeral. Residents must adhere to community rules. Sometimes I look at it and almost laugh. She tried to enforce her own order on everyone, but in the end, her obsession with control was the very thing that destroyed her. I framed it and hung it in my garage. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. Some wars don't end when one side wins. They end when you stop showing up to fight. It's strange, really. I thought this whole ordeal would leave me broken. But it didn't. It just changed me. I'm less trusting, yes, but I'm also sharper, steadier, harder to provoke. If Martha taught me anything, it's that peace isn't something people give you. It's something you build yourself, one quiet, defiant moment at a time. So now, every year on the anniversary of my father's funeral, I park my car in the same spot where the hearse once stood. I stand there in silence, remembering him and her. The world moves on around me, kids on bikes, sprinklers hissing, life returning to normal. But I stand still because I know that moment changed everything. And maybe, somewhere out there, if she's still alive, Martha stands still too, looking back on it all with the same mix of pride and regret. Either way, it's over now. The war, the noise, the chaos, all buried, like my father, beneath the weight of time. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see her standing in the road, rake in hand, stopping the hearse and looking straight at me. And I think that's how I'll always remember her, not as the villain who ruined my father's funeral, but as the reminder that peace isn't free. It's earned. And it's fragile enough to be broken by one entitled woman standing in the middle of the road, convinced she was right.